Good morning, everyone. Although I'm the author of this presentation, I'm really speaking on behalf of a whole team of colleagues at Cape Nature who've been working extremely hard towards Cape Mountain zebra conservation. Cape Mountain zebra are a conservation success story, with the numbers having increased so well over the last few decades that the subspecies has been removed from IUCN's red list. But whereas once these zebra would have ranged freely across this whole shaded area, they are now restricted to about 50 properties, the hatched areas, and most of these are quite small and isolated from each other. So, like many other species, conservation of Cape Mountain zebra depends on metapopulation management. In 2018, the Biodiversity Management Plan for the subspecies was published, and three of the threats that were highlighted were lack of prime habitat, hybridization with other equids, and inbreeding. Today I'm going to talk about each of these three threats and what we've been doing in Cape Nature to address them. To set the scene, there are significant populations of Cape Mountain zebra on 4 Cape Nature reserves and 2 adjacent properties. These are De Hoop and Overberg Test Range, Aneesberg Nature Reserve and Sanbona Wildlife Reserve, Gamkeberg and Kamanassi. Specific challenges that we face on the Cape Nature reserves are small population sizes, skewed sex ratios, isolation, a shortage of prime zebra habitat, and fencing. In March 2020, we set up an internal working group to work towards addressing these issues. This is just an example of an agenda. Matters arising can include things like genetic mixing and protected area expansion, and we also currently have 2 task teams. One is focusing on SKPs and the second on genetics. Monitoring data forms the backbone of all of the management decisions, and we've developed an overarching monitoring protocol and are in the process of developing site-specific protocols for each of the 4 reserves. We also have a standardized data capture template, and the reserves are busy populating this with historical data. Why is monitoring data important? Well, just a few examples. This graph shows Cape Mountain zebra numbers on De Hoop and the neighboring property Overberg Test Range, and it gives a clear idea of population trends since 1963. This map shows the distribution of the main species of game on the 2 properties, De Hoop on the right and OTR on the left, and it's quite clear that the game, including the Cape Mountain zebra, the black dots, have a preference for the Varnhuis-Krans limestone fynbos, which is quite limited on De Hoop. Then the third example, this family tree is possible because Cape Mountain zebra stripe patterns are unique, so we can build up photo identification kits with information on individuals such as their sex, their age, family history, and herd associations and how these change over time. Getting back to the 3 threats that I mentioned at the start of this presentation, I'll begin by looking at shortage of prime habitat. Now we know that our Cape Mountain zebra reserves don't contain ideal habitat, and this map from a paper by Lear et al. Shows reserves with low quality habitat in yellow and good quality habitat in green. And it's quite evident that the best habitat in the province is in the northeast, rather than where our zebra are located. Nevertheless, conditions for Cape Mountain zebra on our reserves can be improved through the acquisition of good quality felt. A good example of what can be achieved is Gamkeberg Nature Reserve. So, in this map, our reserves are in green, and recent land purchases by partner organizations are shown in orange. These amount to about 3,600 hectares over the last few years. Potential future purchases are shown in yellow, and you can see that we're aiming at creating a link between Gamkeberg and the Outeniqua Nature Reserve complex to the south. Protected area expansion is guided by a game carrying capacity layer developed by Jan Vlok, and it's based on his fine-scale vegetation map for the Little Karoo. If we look at Kamanassi Nature Reserve, it's clear that the Cape Mountain zebra carrying capacity for much of the reserve is low. These light green areas have a carrying capacity of about 120 hectares per zebra. There's better Cape Mountain zebra habitat present to the east and to the south. and not surprisingly, the Kamanassi zebra know this. Not surprisingly, the Kamanassi zebra know this. On this map, Cape Mountain zebra records are in red, and it's clear that they use the private land outside the reserve quite extensively. Historically, they would have undertaken seasonal movements between the mountains and the nearby lowlands, and they still do this. But once off the reserve, they have to contend with fences and roads, and this can put them at risk. For example, last year, a herd was trapped in a farm camp without water, resulting in the death of a foal. So the solution isn't to try and contain the zebra to the mountains on the reserve. And instead, the Kamanassi Rangers are working hard with landowners to promote awareness. We've developed a custodianship agreement whereby landowners agree to follow best practice guidelines to ensure the well-being of zebra on their properties. The second threat that I'm going to talk about today is hybridization. Now, this risk is related to fencing issues, and funding is a major obstacle. But the good news is that through the COVID Relief Fund, DFFE has recently awarded about 9 million rand to refence Gamkeberg. Fencing on the other 3 Cape Nature reserves is still problematic. For example, in 2016, a wildfire damaged part of Aneesburg's boundary fence. The result of this was that the reserve's Cape Mountain zebra came into contact with Resnullius Hartmann zebra roaming around outside the reserve. And although the fence has been repaired, there is still a 16-kilometer stretch that needs to be upgraded, and currently no budget to do this. In August last year, an EWT camera trap on private property near Aneesburg picked up Hartmann zebra and Cape Mountain zebra just an hour apart. And then in September this year, they got a photograph of a foal, which may be a Hartmann zebra, but it may also be a hybrid. So we'd like to remove the Hartmanns and any hybrids, but this comes at a cost. It's also tricky because we'll need access to private property for the operation, so we do need the landowners' cooperation. And this is something that the reserve manager is working on at the moment. Apart from communications about removing the Hartmanns, we've also developed an information flyer on hybridization risk, and thanks to our Sandparks colleagues who provided photographs and gave input into the text. The last threat that I want to touch on is inbreeding. Now, genetic diversity in Cape Mountain zebra is related to historically reduced populations. For example, Gamkeberg was down to only 5 animals in the 1970s. But inbreeding also has to do with fragmentation and isolation, which have resulted in the development of 3 distinct genetic stocks. The vast majority of Cape Mountain zebra belong to Craddock stock, but the animals on Gamkeberg and Kamanassi are unique, with each reserve containing 1/3 of the overall genetic diversity of the subspecies. The populations on De Hoop and Overberg Test Range and Sanborna Wildlife Reserve are also of interest because they comprise a mixture of Kamanassi and Craddock stocks. Ultimately, though, every Cape Mountain zebra population should contain alleles from all 3 stocks. A 2019 paper by Kotze et al. Showed that there's been an alarming decrease in Cape Mountain zebra genetic diversity on several protected areas, and since then we've had a number of meetings with Desiree Dalton from Sanby and Yoshan Moodley from Univen about how to address this. Based on their advice, we're currently working on 2 genetic mixing projects. Central to these is to keep the core Gamkeberg and Kamanassi subpopulations genetically isolated for now, but to mix animals from these 2 stocks off-site where the herds can be carefully monitored. The first project is underway in partnership with Sanborna Wildlife Reserve, and the aim is to create a mix of all 3 stocks. Last month, 3 bachelor males were captured on Gamkeberg, and these males will be introduced into a dedicated genetic mixing camp on Sanborna, along with females of mixed Kamanassi Craddock stock. We really hope that it'll be love at first sight and that foals of mixed stock will soon be produced. The second project is planned for Zebras Corp, the property that was recently bought by WWF and is managed by us. The plan is to keep open the opportunity for a corridor between Zebras Corp and Gamkeberg for expansion of habitat for the core Gamkeberg population, but then to create an internal mixing camp where excess Gamkeberg bachelor males will be introduced to SKP Kamanasi females. 200,000 Rand for the project has already been raised through the sale of excess game on Zebras Corp, and we are now in discussion with WWF to source the additional funding that's still needed. Then I just want to touch briefly on another recent translocation. In July, a free roaming stallion and a young mare in the Arniston area were captured and donated to SANParks. Unfortunately, the stallion died during the operation, but the female is now in Bontebok National Park, and we hope that she'll breed with the Cape Mountain zebra there, which are craddock stock. In conclusion, the title of this talk is about mixing things up, and we know that this doesn't just apply to genetic mixing of zebra or just to Cape Nature. One of the aims of the BMP, Biodiversity Management Plan for Cape Mountain zebra, is collaboration between stakeholders. Partnerships are absolutely essential for effective meta-population management, and we are now busy setting up a BMP steering committee which will have interprovincial and interagency representation. Together, we can do so much more. Thank you very much.